Hello my lovely bookish friends, and welcome back to another video. In this video we're going to be going over my January wrap-up, so all the books that I read last month, and there are some really good ones, so let us get to the books.
First up is Babel by R.F. Kuang. I'm just going to read you the dust jacket blurb as it sums up the book perfectly without spoilers. It goes, an actual translation is always the act of betrayal. Oxford, 1836, the city of dreaming spires. It is the centre of all knowledge and progress in the world, and at its heart is Babel, Oxford University's prestigious Royal Institute of Translation, the tower from which all the power in the empire flows. Orphaned in Canton and brought to England by a mysterious guardian, Robin Swift thought Babel a paradise, until it became a prison. But can a student stand against an empire? Man, this book was so good. It is definitely my favourite dark academia book that I've read so far. It was incredibly impactful. That is the word that honestly springs to mind whenever I try to explain my thoughts on this book. The ending in particular just hits you. It felt like a punch in the gut, to be honest. It was so well written and questioned some questionable parts of British history, and yet is also a fantasy novel. I highly recommend this one, and I did do a reading vlog for this novel, so if you're interested in a more detailed response to this book, please check that out. I'll link it above. Next up is Dangerous Alliance. This is a YA Regency mystery romance, and it follows Vicky, who must marry or she and her family will be destitute. Armed with the wisdom of her beloved Jane Austen novels, Vicky steps into society. However, her novels have not prepared her for the strange accidents that keep occurring around her and that could prevent her from surviving to her wedding day. To be honest, I wasn't the biggest fan of this novel, though to be clear, I'm of the opinion that if you don't have anything nice to say, you should say nothing at all. So if I actually hate or DNF a novel, you won't see it on this channel. I want this to be a positive space. So when it comes to this novel, it was enjoyable overall, but for me the love triangle just went on too long and the miscommunication trope annoyed me. I just wanted to sit the couple down and force them to have a proper conversation. However, it was a light-hearted fun which I read in one sitting, and it was a nice way to spend a morning. The next book I read, or rather finally finished, was Jonathan Strange and Miss Norrell. This book tells the story of two magicians who are trying to bring magic back to England. Now, if you've watched some of my other videos, you will know that this novel has been on my bookshelf for about 7 years, and I set myself the challenge of reading this book last year after many attempts of starting and not getting through it. And I finished it! It was so good. I am so glad though that I listened to the audiobook, as there are so many footnotes in this book that there are entire pages worth of footnotes, which are great for world building but feel a bit dense when reading. The world building is incredible in this book though. It is so well put together and it feels like a classic Regency novel. I love the characters and how their stories weave together. I'm so glad I have read this book, and I think now that I have listened to the audiobook, I will be able to read the physical version next time. Next up, I read The Sad Ghost Club Volume 2. This graphic novel follows the ghosts from the first volume. However, when a third ghost joins the club, things get a bit more complicated. Can the ghosts overcome the insecurities and uncertainties in their new friendship and find a way to welcome new members to the club? I love this series. It is so cute and wholesome. It's a really warm-hearted story that I can imagine will be really good for younger readers going through a hard time, or older readers like myself, as it touches the heart and makes me feel good as I read, and I am very much looking forward to the third volume that comes out later this year. Next we have The Night Circus. The synopsis for this goes as follows. The circus arrives without warning. No announcement precedes it. It is simply there, when yesterday it was not. A black sign painted in white letters hangs upon the gates, reads, "Open at nightfall, closes at dawn." As the sun disappears beyond the horizon, all above the tents small lights begin to flicker, as though the entirety of the circus is covered in particularly bright fireflies. When the tents are all aglow, sparkling against the night sky, a sign appears. "The Circus of Dreams. Now the circus is open. Now you may enter." This book was on my TBR list for this year, and it was so good. Very magical and unexpectedly romantic. I didn't realise the love stories was going to be so lovely, and I was really rooting for them. It was a beautifully written with some wonderful prose, and I loved how all the storylines interweave together. I also have a reading vlog for this novel, which I'll link above as well. Next up we have Snow and Rose. This is a middle grade fantasy novel, and it is also a retelling of the Rose Red Snow White fairy tale. The synopsis goes: Snow and Rose didn't know they were living in a fairy tale. People never do. Once they lived in a big house with spectacular gardens and an army of servants. Once they had a father and a mother who loved them more than the sun and moon. But that was before their father disappeared into the woods and their mother disappeared into sorrow. This is the story of two sisters and the enchanted woods that have been waiting for them to break a set of terrible spells. I really enjoyed this book. I have seen lots of good stuff about this book on Booktube, but I didn't realise just how much I was going to like it. The illustrations are beautiful and I adore fairy tales, so this was just perfect and a wholesome tale that was just what I needed for this gloomy season. Okay, so these next books I haven't finished, and this is my reread of Sorcery of Thorns by Margaret Rogerson. I love this book and I read it back in 2021, and honestly it's one of my favourite books of all time. I wanted to reread the novel as this January the sequel novella was released, so I wanted to refresh myself before reading that, and I had hoped to read them both this month. However, the novella didn't arrive until later, so I've started and I will finish these two next month, which is why I'm not giving you a synopsis on these, as you'll see it in the February wrap-up and in an upcoming reading vlog.
The last book on this list, which I don't own a physical copy of because I listened to it as an audiobook, is The Red Palace by June Hur. Now this is a YA historical, I want to call it a murder mystery, but it's perhaps better as like a murder thriller kind of novel. And it is also partially a retelling of a real historical Korean event about a prince called Prince Sado, which I won't get into because it kind of gives away part of the plot of this book. But it follows, this novel follows the story of a palace nurse who, there is this massacre essentially back in the nurses training centre, and she gets involved and tries to solve this murder. However, one of the suspects happens to be this crown prince, who is this real life historical Korean figure called Prince Sado. Now I'll leave you at that because, like I said, if I say much more, it gives away part of the plot. But this audiobook was really good. For some reason this novel is quite hard to find a physical copy of in the UK. Like, it wasn't properly on Amazon, I couldn't find it on Waterstones, I could only really find the audiobook, but the narrator was really good and the story was just really gripping. I listened to it in I think it was like 3 sittings. I was really engaged the whole way through, and the narrator does a great job, so I do highly recommend checking out this audiobook. And I also really want to find a physical edition of this book, because I'm the type of person who, if I like a book on audiobook or a book that I've read as an ebook, then I will want a physical edition too. Having a Kindle and having Audible doesn't actually in any way help with my book buying situation, because I just want the books as a physical copy as well. So that is it for all the books that I read in January, and as I've said, this has been a pretty good month. I really enjoyed a lot of the books that I've read. Red Palace was great, Night Circus was brilliant, and as was, of course, Babel. That was such a great novel to start this year off with, and also Snow and Rose was really good too. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to the books that I'm planning to read in February, because I've still got to finish my reread of Sorcery of Thorns, and then also read The Mystery of Thorn Manor, which is the novella that comes after it, and I'm so excited. And I've had some books out from the library recently which I'm really excited to dive into too. So that brings us to the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, please consider liking and subscribing, as I have a lot more bookish content to come. So until next time, my lovely bookish friends, bye!